drift away. And I don't care how high you are.
It's the biggest palace complex in the world, with almost 10,000 rooms. So big that it's a city unto itself. And it was all built for one man. For 500 years, it was the seat of the most powerful ruler on earth. He had absolute control over the life and death of his followers. Until the 20th century, entry to the inner precincts was prohibited to all males except the emperor and eunuchs. Trespassers in this palace met one fate: death. Even the name of the palace inspired fear. 24 Chinese emperors called it home, but their subjects called it the Forbidden City. Today, its long closed doors open as we go deep inside China's Forbidden City. When it was first built, the Forbidden City was one of the most secret places on Earth. Even today, when it attracts 8 million visitors a year, only a small part of it is open to the public. Between 1407 and 1420, up to 1 million convict and conscript laborers did the heavy work, while 100,000 skilled craftsmen completed the fine detail. It's the biggest palace complex still standing in China. And it had to be big, because it was the home of a god. The Chinese emperor was more than just a ruler. To the people of Imperial China, he was a divine being, the son of heaven, and the link between this world and the celestial. They believed that the supreme deity lived in a 10,000-room palace on the pole star. But the son of heaven's palace was here on earth. And, as legend has it, because the son shouldn't outdo the father, his palace had only 9,999 rooms. As the son of heaven, the Chinese emperor's actions were said to make the sun rise and the crops grow. His palace, the Forbidden City, was both the seat of government and a sacred place. The ancient Chinese believed that just as the pole star palace of the supreme deity was the center of the heavens, so the Forbidden City was the center of the earth. To them, it was the navel of the world. The start of the 15th century was a chaotic time in China. And at the heart of that chaos was a prince named Zhu Di. The victorious Chinese army had only recently pushed the Mongols back over the Great Wall, when the country was once more torn asunder. Zhu Di, the prince from the north, rebelled against the emperor in the south. Zhu Di seized the throne, but his troubles were far from over. Although he had conquered the capital, Nanjing, he still had powerful enemies there.
Gathered arrogance.
Even executing his opponents didn't solve his problems. There was an assassination attempt, and it became clear to Zhu Di that Nanjing remained a dangerous place. Haunted by the ghosts of his opponents, he sought a way out. But it wasn't only the situation in Nanjing that gave Zhu Di sleepless nights. Mongol armies were once more on the march and threatening to breach the Great Wall. So Zhu Di found a radical solution to both his problems. He abandoned Nanjing and created a new capital, Beijing, in the north. It was a massive undertaking. By the time it was done, millions of people had moved to Beijing and built one of the greatest cities of all time. Zhu Di was a ruthless but gifted ruler and a megalomaniac. He never did anything small. At the same time as he started building the new capital, he equipped a huge armada of ships to sail the western seas. The ships were the largest wooden vessels ever built, and he assembled a fleet of 300. The biggest had 9 masts and could carry 1,000 people. It was the largest armada in history until the Second World War. The fleet was commanded by the eunuch admiral Zheng He. It ruled the water for 28 years. But Zhu Di had even bigger projects at home. He had the Grand Canal rebuilt and the Great Wall extended. But his largest project was to tear down Kublai Khan's old palace in Beijing and build a new one in its place. The heirs of Genghis Khan had lived in Beijing for almost 100 years. But the old palace wasn't good enough for Zhu Di. He had it razed to the ground to make way for the new one. The rubble was used to make a mountain that overlooked his new palace complex. The construction of the new palace took 14 years. By the time it was done, it was said to have 1,000 buildings and more than 9,000 rooms. For 500 years, its name would be spoken with awe. It was called the Forbidden City. At the very heart of Beijing, it formed a large rectangle, 3/4 of a kilometer wide and nearly a kilometer deep. High walls and a wide moat separated it from the rest of the city. The walls enclosed an immense space, 720,000 square meters. 55 Buckingham Palaces, or more than 100 football pitches, could fit inside its grounds. From the 15th century to the 20th, the Forbidden City was the hub of the Chinese Empire. It was the home of 24 emperors, the seat of government, and the heart of a civilization. The Forbidden City was a city within a city. Deep inside the walled city of Beijing was another walled city, the Imperial City. This was reserved for the royal family and the highest members of society. And within that was yet another walled city, the most secret and exclusive place in China, where mistaken entry could result in death, the Forbidden City. Hidden behind its high, impenetrable walls, life in the Forbidden City assumed mythic qualities. The only thing that most people outside could see were the gold-colored roofs of the highest buildings soaring above the walls. For them, the Forbidden City was synonymous with mystery. But today, we can go where they could not. On the eve of the 600th anniversary of its construction, its doors are opened, and we can finally reveal the secrets of the Forbidden City. In 1407, Europe was recovering from the plague. The Aztecs in Mexico were building an empire, and in Beijing, preparations had begun on the Forbidden City. It would take almost 10 years just to gather the necessary building materials and assemble the workers. Little is known of most of the men who did the construction work. Their names have been lost to time. Even some of the building techniques they used remain a mystery. Yet these master architects and craftsmen built a palace of enduring beauty. The Forbidden City was the largest wooden palace complex in the world. At its heart were the three great halls, standing on high white marble terraces that raised them more than 2 stories above the courtyard. More than 1,000 carved marble dragons drained rainwater away from the huge terraces. The palace complex was an architectural masterpiece, and today is one of the United Nations World Heritage Sites. The Forbidden City was conceived on a grand scale. Visitors had to walk down a majestic ceremonial avenue just to get to it. On the way, they passed through 3 gates. Today, the most famous of these is Tiananmen Gate, but even larger was the Meridian Gate, which pierced the wall that surrounds the Forbidden City. The Meridian Gate was the main entrance to the Forbidden City. It was the tallest gate in Beijing, the height of a 12-story building. The Hall of Supreme Harmony was the most important building in the Forbidden City, and at half the size of a football pitch, it was also the biggest, sitting on 3 white marble terraces. Like all the buildings in the Forbidden City, it was made of wood. Although it contained the most important throne room in the palace complex, the largest imperial audiences took place not inside the building, but in the vast courtyard outside. Thousands of officials would gather there to hear imperial proclamations.